ISO 14001 and Environmental Management Systems EMS Training Module. Good morning, afternoon again, everyone. This session is crucial as we move into the heart of ISO 14001, Leadership and Planning. Let's start with Clause 5, Leadership. This clause makes it absolutely clear that an environmental management system isn't just something for the environmental department. It requires active involvement, promotion, and accountability from the very top. Without strong leadership commitment, an EMS can become just paperwork. When top management is genuinely engaged, the EMS becomes integrated into the organization's core business, making it truly effective. Clause 5.1 specifically talks about leadership and commitment. This isn't just about signing off on documents. Top management has specific responsibilities. They need to take accountability for the EMS's effectiveness. If it's not working, the buck stops with them. They must ensure that the environmental policy and objectives are not just buzzwords, but are aligned with the company's overall strategic direction. They are responsible for making sure enough resources, whether it's money, people, or technology, are available. They need to actively communicate why effective environmental management is important and support everyone in contributing. And finally, they must promote and champion continual improvement. Why is this top management involvement so critical? Firstly, it drives culture. When the CEO or senior leaders prioritize environmental responsibility, it sends a clear message to everyone in the organization. Secondly, they control resource allocation. Without their buy-in, crucial financial, human, and technological resources simply won't be available for environmental initiatives. Thirdly, it ensures integration. The EMS won't just be an add-on, it will become part of the business strategy. They can remove barriers and resistance to change, fostering cross-functional cooperation. And lastly, their involvement adds credibility. Imagine if your CEO regularly reviews EMS performance reports, actively allocates budget for a new solar panel installation, and talks about environmental goals in all-hands meetings. That shows genuine commitment, far more than just having an environmental policy somewhere in a folder. This level of engagement is what truly makes an EMS successful. The second key element of leadership is the environmental policy, as required by Clause 5.2. This isn't just a mission statement, it's a high-level commitment from top management that sets the overall direction for your EMS. It also serves as the framework for setting specific environmental objectives later on. For a robust policy, it needs to meet several requirements. First, it must be appropriate to your organization's context, meaning it's relevant to your purpose, your size, and your specific environmental impacts. A policy for a software company will look different from a chemical plant. It must include a commitment to the protection of the environment, which explicitly includes the prevention of pollution. It needs a clear commitment to fulfill all compliance obligations, meaning adherence to all legal and other requirements you identify. There must be a commitment to continual improvement of the EMS itself, aimed at enhancing your environmental performance. And, importantly, it must provide a framework for setting environmental objectives. It tells you what kind of goals you'll set. Finally, it must be documented and readily available. Let's look at an example. A generic policy might just say, "Our company is committed to minimizing our environmental footprint by preventing pollution, complying with all environmental regulations, and continually improving." While correct, it's a bit too general. A better example for a logistics company might be, "ABC Logistics is committed to achieving environmental excellence by preventing pollution from our fleet and operations, ensuring full compliance with transport and environmental regulations, and continually improving our fuel efficiency and waste management practices. We aim to minimize our carbon emissions and promote sustainable logistics solutions." See how it's tailored and gives specific areas for objectives? It's not enough to just have a policy, it needs to be known. The environmental policy must be available to interested parties. This means it could be on your website for customers or investors, or accessible to regulatory bodies. It must be maintained as documented information, meaning it's officially recorded and kept updated. And critically, it must be communicated within the organization. This means employees need to know about it. Think about displaying it on notice boards, publishing it on the company intranet, discussing it during new employee induction, and in regular training sessions. The goal is for everyone to understand the company's environmental commitment. The final aspect of leadership is Clause 5.3. Organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Top management is responsible for ensuring that everyone understands who is responsible for what within the EMS. This means clearly assigning and communicating specific environmental responsibilities and authorities for various roles throughout the organization. While the standard no longer requires a single management representative, like an EMS manager, the functions traditionally performed by such a person still need to be assigned. These typically include ensuring that the EMS conforms to the standard's requirements and reporting on the EMS's performance to top management. For example, your EMS documentation might define that the production manager is responsible for ensuring proper waste segregation on their factory floor. The maintenance head is responsible for preventing and reporting any environmental leaks from machinery. The HR manager is responsible for maintaining all environmental training records, and perhaps the environmental head or sustainability director is responsible for reporting the overall EMS performance directly to the CEO, ensuring accountability. Now we transition from leadership to planning. Clause 6. If Clause 5 was about the commitment, Clause 6 is where that commitment turns into concrete action. This section details how an organization needs to plan its EMS. It's about identifying potential risks and opportunities related to your environmental aspects, your legal obligations, and all those internal and external issues we discussed in Clause 4. This is truly where the plan part of the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle kicks off. The first step in planning is Clause 6.1, which focuses on actions to address risks and opportunities. We need to determine the risks and opportunities related to our environmental aspects, our compliance obligations, and the broader context issues. The goal is to ensure the EMS works as intended, prevents negative outcomes, and continually improves. Within this, 6.1.2 is crucial: identifying environmental aspects and impacts. This is where you systematically list everything your organization does that can interact with the environment. Let's quickly recap the definitions with new examples. An environmental aspect is the cause. It's an element of your activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. For a manufacturing plant, aspects include things like your electricity usage, water consumption, how much raw material you use, the waste you generate, solid, hazardous, the air you emit, VOCs, particulates, the wastewater you discharge, even the noise you make. In an office, aspects are simpler: electricity for lights and computers, paper consumption, general office waste. A logistics company would have fuel consumption by vehicles, disposal of old tires, and engine oil waste. A hotel might list water use for laundry, food waste, or cleaning chemical usage. The environmental impact is the effect, the change to the environment resulting from that aspect. So, for energy consumption, the aspect, the impact is depletion of natural resources, or climate change due to greenhouse gas emissions. From waste generation, the impact is landfill burden, or soil/water contamination, if not properly managed. Wastewater discharge leads to water pollution and harm to aquatic life. Air emissions result in air pollution and respiratory issues. Noise can cause disturbance to the local community or wildlife. Water consumption contributes to water scarcity and ecosystem disruption. Once you've identified all your aspects, you need to figure out which ones are significant. Not every aspect is equally important, and you want to focus your resources on those that matter most. You need to develop a methodology to evaluate your aspects based on significance criteria. These commonly include the scale of the impact. How large is the change to the environment? Is it a massive air emission or just a small amount of paper waste? The severity of the impact. How serious is the change? Is it toxic waste versus non-toxic waste? The probability of occurrence. How likely is that impact to actually happen? Legal compliance. Is there a specific legal requirement or limit associated with that aspect? This often makes an aspect significant by default. The concern of interested parties. Is it a big concern for the local community, regulators, or your customers? And finally, your ability to control or influence that aspect. You should focus on what you can actually manage. For example, for a manufacturing factory, the discharge of wastewater might be a significant aspect because it involves a high volume, has strict legal limits, and could potentially harm aquatic life. On the other hand, the general office paper waste, while an environmental aspect, might be determined as non-significant because its individual impact is relatively small and easily managed. We touched on this earlier, but it's so important it gets its own mention here. The life cycle perspective. When identifying your environmental aspects, ISO 14001 requires you to consider the entire life cycle of your products and services. This doesn't mean you have to conduct a full, detailed, scientific life cycle assessment for every single product, but you do need to think about the environmental impacts at each stage. What stages should you consider? Raw material acquisition. Where do your materials come from, and what are the environmental impacts of getting them? Design. The choices made during design can significantly affect environmental impacts in later stages. Can we design for less waste or easier recycling? Production, manufacturing. This is your direct operations, the within-your-walls part. Transportation and distribution. The impacts of shipping your products. Use. What are the environmental aspects when the consumer actually uses your product? Think about the energy consumption of an appliance or the water usage of a washing machine. End-of-life treatment. Moving on to Clause 6.1.3, which is about compliance obligations. This is non-negotiable. Your organization must identify all legal requirements and any other requirements that apply to your environmental aspects. These include legal requirements. Think about national laws, state regulations, local permits, licenses you hold, and even international treaties if they apply to your operations. Other requirements. These are things you voluntarily commit to, but are still binding once you've committed. This could be industry codes of practice, your own corporate policies, or agreements with interested parties like specific customer requirements for greener products, or community agreements regarding noise levels. How do you identify and access them? You can get them from government websites, subscribe to legal databases, consult environmental consultants, join industry associations, or use specialized legal update services. For other requirements, you'd look at your customer contracts or your internal corporate policies. You need a defined process for finding, documenting, and making these easily accessible. For instance, a textile dyeing unit needs to identify legal requirements like the Water Pollution Control Act, Air Pollution Act, and hazardous waste rules, as well as local municipal bylaws regarding wastewater discharge. For other requirements, they might need to follow the textile industry's code of conduct on chemical use, adhere to customer requirements for eco-friendly dyes, or abide by their internal corporate sustainability guidelines. It's not a one-time activity. Your identified compliance obligations must be kept up to date. Laws and regulations change, and your voluntary commitments might evolve. This means you need a systematic process for monitoring these changes. This could involve subscribing to regulatory alert services, assigning specific responsibility for legal updates to a department or even an individual, and conducting regular reviews of your internal legal register. Staying current is key to avoiding non-compliance. Now that we've identified all these crucial elements, our risks, opportunities, significant environmental aspects, and compliance obligations, Clause 6.1.4 requires us to plan actions to address them. These actions aren't standalone. They must be integrated into your overall EMS processes. How do we address them? Often this leads to setting objectives, which we'll cover next. It involves establishing operational controls, specific procedures to manage your significant aspects. For example, documented procedures for handling hazardous waste, installing new emission control equipment, or regular maintenance schedules for machinery to prevent leaks. It requires emergency preparedness plans for potential spills, fires, or other environmental incidents. You need to ensure proper resource allocation, having the right money, people, and technology. It involves training and awareness to ensure employees understand their role in managing these aspects. And monitoring and measurement to track whether your actions are effective. Finally, appropriate communication, both internal and external. Let's look at some examples. If a significant aspect is air emissions from a boiler, your actions might include installing new emission control technology, training staff on its operation, monitoring emissions daily, and setting an objective to reduce sulfur oxides by a certain percentage. If there's a new compliance obligation like a new wastewater discharge limit, your actions would be updating your wastewater treatment plant, revising procedures for discharge, increasing monitoring frequency, and reporting to regulators. If you identify a risk like water scarcity in your region, actions could be setting an objective to reduce water consumption significantly, investing in rainwater harvesting, or exploring water recycling. And for an opportunity, like increasing market demand for green products, your actions might be researching and developing eco-friendly product lines, actively marketing their environmental benefits, and obtaining relevant eco-certifications. Moving on to Clause 6.2, Environmental Objectives and Planning to Achieve Them. This is where your planning becomes concrete. You need to establish specific environmental objectives for relevant functions and levels within your organization. These objectives must be consistent with your overall environmental policy. To make your objectives effective and auditable, we use the SMART criteria. S for specific. Your objective should be clear and well-defined, not vague. Instead of reduce waste, say reduce non-hazardous solid waste. M for measurable. You need a way to track your progress. Can you quantify it? Use percentages, specific numbers, or metrics. A for achievable. It needs to be realistic and attainable given your resources and context. Don't set impossible goals. R for relevant. Your objective must align with your environmental policy and address your significant environmental aspects and identified risks, opportunities. T for time-bound. It needs a target date for completion. Let's look at examples. A poor objective would be simply reduce waste. It's not specific, measurable, or time-bound. A better, SMART objective would be reduce non-hazardous solid waste sent to landfill by 15% from 2024 levels by December 31, 2026, in the production facility. See how clear and trackable that is? Another poor one, be more energy efficient. A SMART improvement decrease electricity consumption per unit of production by 10% by June 30th, 2027 through the installation of energy-efficient lighting and machinery upgrades. This tells you exactly what, how much, by when, and even a bit of the how. Once you have your SMART objectives, the next step is to plan the actions to achieve them. For each objective, you need to map out what will be done, the specific tasks, projects, or initiatives. What resources will be required? This includes financial budget, personnel, specific equipment, or technology. Who will be responsible? Assign clear roles or even specific individuals. When it will be completed, set realistic timelines and milestones for each task. How the results will be evaluated. What indicators will you monitor to ensure you're on track and have achieved the objective? Let's continue with our waste reduction. SMART objective. Reduce non-hazardous solid waste sent to landfill by 15% from 2024 levels by December 31st, 2026, in the production facility. What will be done? We'll implement a new waste segregation system, conduct thorough employee training on sorting, explore new recycling vendors, and conduct a detailed waste audit. What resources? We'll need a budget for new, clearly labeled segregation bins, materials for training, and possibly fees for a waste audit consultant. Who will be responsible? The production manager will have overall responsibility, with designated team leads for segregation, HR for training, and procurement for finding new vendors. When will it be completed? We'll aim to have the segregation system in place by Q2 2025. Training completed by Q3 2025. Vendor review by Q4 2025. And the initial waste audit by Q1 2026. How will we evaluate the results? We'll track monthly waste reports showing tonnage sent to landfill, conduct internal audits of segregation practices, and perhaps even employee surveys to gauge awareness and participation. This comprehensive planning ensures that your objectives are not just targets, but actionable plans.